Hey guys, tonight we sail north, far north into the misty hush of old Iceland, where the mornings smell like wet salt and fish oil, and the ocean murmurs things only the locals understand. You trudge through a sleepy village at dawn, boots crunching over pebbled frost, breath fogging the air. Ahead, wooden docks creak like bones under pressure. Every shack and shackled boat seems held together by wind and willpower alone. Somewhere nearby, a gull lets out a squawk that sounds more like a warning than a greeting. This isn't just some quiet fishing port. It's the kind of place where people don't just check the weather, they listen for it, smell it, taste it. And somehow, they've done it for generations, long before Doppler radar and weather apps with push notifications. Here, reading the sea is a craft and not metaphorically. The way you can sniff bacon to see if it's gone off? These folks sniff brine to predict a storm. That's tonight's lullaby, and spoiler alert, you probably won't survive trying this without a nose like a bloodhound and the patience of a glacier. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment with your location and local time. I'd love to see how far this little fishing trip drifts. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand now at the edge of the dock, eyeing the sea. It doesn't look particularly threatening, but the old man beside you, wrapped in wool and smoke, and something that might be fish scale, snorts softly through his nose and mutters, "South swell's turning. You smell that?" You do not. You smell the ocean, sure. Salt. Maybe a little kelp, something faintly fishy. But to this man, this Icelandic Fishos who's spent more years on the water than on land, there's a difference in the air today. And it means something. Historians still argue whether these nasal forecasts were real meteorology or just wishful thinking fortified by gut instinct and decades of practice. But either way, the Fishos believed in them. And honestly, you kind of do too. There's something ancient about it, primal, like knowing which berries are poisonous by scent alone or feeling in your bones when someone's watching you. In the 1700s and well into the 1800s, Icelandic coastal communities had no barometers, no charts, and definitely no satellite data. What they did have were rituals, stories, and an unshakable connection to the sea. Every breath they took was a reading, a clue, a warning. You begin to realize that for them, the ocean wasn't scenery, it was a personality, moody, shifty, but honest, if you knew how to listen. That old man beside you, let's call him Thorder. He's not just sniffing randomly. He's filtering for something specific, the way the wind carries salt over land, the density of the morning air. If the scent of fish oil lingers longer than usual, or if there's a tang of iron mixed in something metallic, something ominous, and if there's a whiff of decay in the breeze, that's not just gross, that's incoming weather. There's even a term the locals whisper, brimlicht, literally surf smell. It's more than just sea air. It's a specific scent that appears hours before a change in atmospheric pressure. And while modern science hasn't confirmed the chemistry behind it, it is acknowledged that certain marine compounds like dimethyl sulfide, which comes from decaying plankton, can be released in higher quantities before storms due to churning water and shifting currents. So yeah, they were probably onto something. You walk slowly through the village now, past houses with turf roofs and fish hanging on long racks like wind chimes of the dead. Every corner of this place breeds ocean. You pass a group of kids chasing each other with pieces of dried cod. One skids to a stop, sniffs the air like a dog, and says, "Storm's coming." You raise an eyebrow. Seriously? But then you remember the spring of 1783, a particularly brutal year etched into Icelandic memory. There were no warning bells from the sky, no sudden drops in temperature. Just that smell. That faint, unplaceable, wrong in a way you can't argue with smell. And by midnight, waves 30 feet high crashed against the cliffs like the ocean had grown claws. Dozens of boats never returned. The survivors all claimed they'd smelled something strange that morning, something that whispered, "Stay home." Some villagers even claim their sheep act weird before weather hits. Woolly barometers, if you will. There's a joke among them that Icelandic sheep know more about low pressure than the university in Reykjavik. But jokes aside, this is a way of life. Predicting storms by smell isn't just a novelty, it's survival. When your entire livelihood depends on not getting caught in a sudden squall, every sense sharpens. And for the Icelandic Fishos, the nose leads the way. Thordur takes one last long sniff. "It'll rain by second meal," he says. You glance at the perfectly clear sky, not a cloud in sight, just a soft blue dome above, the kind that makes you want to nap under it. You nod politely. By second meal, it rains. Of course it does. The storm doesn't crash in like a dramatic movie scene. It just happens, like a slow exhale from the sky. One moment you're enjoying a slab of dried fish and some alarmingly sour rye bread, and the next, the air thickens. The light fades a shade too fast. Raindrops start small pinpricks, lazy and sparse, but then the tempo shifts, and it's like the sky decided it was done pretending to be polite. You watch it roll in from the north, a curtain of mist and wind licking across the sea. The locals barely react. They duck into sheds, pull cloaks tighter, mutter something that sounds like they've been expecting this all day, which, of course, they have. Because remember what Thordur said? Second meal. And here it is, right on cue. You pull your coat tighter and scurry under a porch alongside a few other travelers. One of them offers you a mug of something hot that tastes like coffee had a fight with a piece of driftwood. You take a sip anyway. The rain drums a lullaby on the roof, and you realize this isn't just weather, it's a performance. And the Fishos? They're backstage crew and lead actors all at once. The Icelandic way of reading storms wasn't all in the nose. No, that was just Act 1. Act 2? Eyes. The ability to read the sea wasn't some poetic turn of phrase. It meant tracking wave behavior, foam color, cloud shapes, bird flight paths, even how seals moved. Yes, seals. There's a long-standing belief that seals grow restless before a storm, disappearing from favorite spots or barking more than usual. Mainstream history notes that Icelanders were among the most visually observant mariners in Europe. They could look at the horizon and tell you not just if a storm was coming, but how bad, from where, and how long it would last. Modern meteorology has confirmed that cloud height, sea swell direction, and even foam texture are reliable indicators of pressure changes. But back then, they didn't need confirmation. They had instinct. Thordur is back, now with a puff and feather cap and that look that says, "You're probably not built for this place, are you?" He points at the sea, specifically the chop of it just beyond the headland. "See how it shears right?" he says. "Means it's a crosswind front. Short one. You'll dry off before sleep." Then he shrugs and walks off like he didn't just drop an impromptu marine forecast. And he's right again. 20 minutes later, the rain stops. Not fades. Stops. Like a light switch. You're left blinking at a sky that's suddenly golden, the clouds pulling apart like someone untangling wool. Historians still argue whether these skills were passed down formally like family recipes or absorbed just by living here. Probably a bit of both. Some villages had informal weathermen, not shamans, but elders with uncanny senses. Others claim the knowledge was communal, learned by osmosis, and corrected only when someone got soaked or worse. A particularly quirky tidbit? There were Icelandic fishers who swore that fish themselves knew the weather. Cod, in particular, were said to swim deeper when storms approached. Not a huge surprise by today's science. Fish do respond to pressure changes. But the part that raises eyebrows? These men would listen to nets. They'd haul up a catch and note how the fish flopped. If the cod were sluggish, cold front. If they thrashed like mad, windstorm inbound. Imagine explaining that one to your meteorology professor. Now you're wandering the beach, the storm behind you and gulls screaming above like they're arguing over dinner. A boy is stacking small stones into a pyramid. You ask what he's doing. He says, "My grandpa says this keeps the fog out." You don't laugh. Not anymore. You've seen enough weirdly correct weather predictions today to know not to mess with Fisho wisdom. You come to a spit of black sand, the water lapping lazily at the edge. It's peaceful now. But locals will tell you it's exactly this kind of deceptive calm that makes the ocean dangerous. It pretends to sleep. And then it changes. No lightning, no roaring thunder, just a quiet shift. A feeling, maybe even a smell. You pick up a rock smooth and dark like polished bone and skim it across the surface. It skips once, twice, and then disappears. Just like the morning's clarity, just like your skepticism. The sun begins to set in that ridiculous Icelandic way, long, slow, like it's being dragged reluctantly under the horizon. The air smells clean again. No storm, no threat. But your nose twitches. Was that iron? Seaweed? Something sweet and sour at once? And somewhere in the distance a dog barks. A short, clipped warning. You're not sure what it means. Yet. But you're starting to understand why the Fishos did. The next morning arrives not with an alarm clock, but with the guttural squawk of seabirds and the rhythmic grunt of oars in water. You step out of your small rented cottage to a sky the color of watered-down milk and a breeze that tastes like crushed kelp and cold iron. It's boat day. Icelandic fishing boats in the 1800s were not majestic ships with billowing sails and dramatic bowsprits. They were squat, sturdy things, open-decked, usually made of driftwood, and powered by the back-breaking labor of 6 or more men rowing in harsh sink. The kind of boats that didn't care about comfort, only survival. You don't step into one as much as you submit to it. A fisherman named Jon gestures for you to follow. He's got arms like cured ham and a beard that's collected more sea stories than most books. He says nothing, just hands you a rough-woven cloak and nods toward the boat bobbing quietly in the harbor. You row out slowly. The wind is soft today, but Jon still pauses now and then, sniffing, always sniffing. You start to notice it too, that slightly resinous bite in the air, like rotting wood and distant lightning. He mumbles, "Takes 3 sniffs to know a lie." You don't ask what that means. As you drift further from shore, the sea changes character. It isn't just blue anymore, it's layered. Greens under blues, light above shadow. Jon points out areas he calls sky mirrors, patches of glassy water that reflect cloud cover, but betray nothing about what churns beneath. According to him, those are usually traps, calm spots where currents reverse without warning, spinning boats sideways. No one trusts a mirror that doesn't show its true depth. There's a small island ahead, uninhabited except for nesting birds and, allegedly, spirits. Jon says that's where his grandfather lost a boat and most of his crew. The storm came in too fast, but his grandfather knew it before the sky did, because the air had changed, not just the temperature, but the texture. It got thicker, he says, like breathing through old wool. Mainstream historical accounts actually support this. The best Icelandic sailors were sensitive to humidity shifts and could detect minor barometric pressure drops physically before instruments were even invented. The modern term is barometric pressure headaches, but Jon calls it forehead weight. Your face gets heavy, he says, and you row faster. There's also the matter of sound. While you sit quietly in the boat, Jan closes his eyes. Listen, he whispers, not to the waves or the birds, but to the echoes. Icelanders often judged upcoming storms by how sound traveled across the water. On a clear day, distant voices or gull cries would carry far, but when a storm brewed, sound went flat. It hit the water and just died. Historians still argue whether this was folklore or a true scientific phenomenon. You're leaning toward the latter. Now for your daily dose of fisho weirdness. Some old sailors swore they could smell sunlight. No joke. Not heat, light. The theory, if you can call it that, was that on days when sunlight smelled wrong, it meant the wind would shift by dusk. Scientists today would say this has to do with how certain airborne particles scatter light and affect olfaction. The Fishos? They just said, if the light smells like moss, stay ashore. By noon, you've reached the outer fishing lanes. Nets are dropped with the grace of practiced hands, and the waiting begins. You sip lukewarm fish broth and pretend you're not queasy. John offers you dried shark meat, fermented, ammonia-rich, and strong enough to qualify as chemical warfare. You try a nibble, and your brain briefly questions whether it deserves to survive. You ask about storms again, this time about the worst he's seen. He tells you about the Sky's Mouth storm back in 1968. It opened up with no warning, no sniff, no shimmer, no seabird scream. Just a sudden swallowing of light. Within minutes, 3 boats flipped. One was his cousin's. No bodies were recovered, only a hat and a wooden spoon. That's when we knew, he says grimly. Some storms are born angry. There's a moment of silence after that, broken only by the creak of the hull and the soft lapping of water. The nets start tugging. Fish are biting. Jan works quickly, like a man who's done this for 50 years, which he probably has. The rhythm of hauling, sorting, gutting begins, and the boat becomes a ballet of function and blood. You help where you can, mostly by not falling overboard. And through it all, you sniff, you listen. You squint at clouds and try to read them like Jan does. You're not good at it, not yet. But something in you shifts. You stop thinking of the ocean as unpredictable. It's not. It's just coded in a language you haven't quite learned yet. Evening approaches. The nets are heavy with catch, and the boat starts its slow return. The sun hangs low, and the horizon is a gentle bruise of orange and purple. You notice the air has warmed slightly, and there's a new smell, peppery, dry. Jan doesn't comment. He just rows faster. Back at shore, the first clouds touch the mountain peaks again. Storms never say goodbye. Only see you soon. You're back on land, boots soaked and arms tired, but Jan barely slows his stride. He walks ahead, squinting at the sky like it's a badly behaved child. Storm's not tonight, he mutters, but she's packing her bags. You chuckle, but only a little. Tut-tut. Because part of you now believes that he's right. You follow him inland toward his turf-roofed home, where you'll be staying the night. It looks like it's grown out of the earth itself, squat and mossy, with wooden beams that seem to sag in a permanent shrug. He pushes the door open, and the smell of smoked fish, salt, and something faintly medicinal wafts out. It's not unpleasant, just very real. Inside, the walls are lined with oddities, weathered barometers that don't work anymore, whale bones carved into spoons, and something that might once have been a puffin. On a shelf sits a jar filled with what looks like dried seaweed and rabbit fur. You don't ask. He lights a small oil lamp, and the room turns amber, shadows dancing on the thick walls. Now, he says, sitting down and motioning for you to do the same. Let me tell you how my grandfather predicted the weather with just his ears. Yes ears. Apparently, the old man could tell a storm was brewing based on how his ears popped or tingled. He said they rang like church bells when the weather went sour, Jan explains. Said it was the wind warning him. Mainstream science has explored similar ideas. Sudden drops in air pressure can affect the inner ear, especially in older individuals. Still, Jan swears his grandfather once predicted a blizzard 6 hours in advance just because his left ear itched like mad. Right ear was for gossip. Left was for doom, he laughs. And while we're diving into the odd, here's another gem. Fishers used to believe that horses could smell storms. If your horse refused to walk near the coast on a particular morning, you didn't set sail. Simple as that. Historians still argue whether this was superstition or simply animal intuition reacting to ozone and pressure changes. Either way, when the horses said no, the boat stayed dry. You sip a mug of hot something John calls it sea angel tea, but it tastes like peppermint and moss. Made from herbs the sheep refuse to eat, he says proudly. Then he leans in conspiratorial. Want to know how I smell the sea? Of course you do. He leads you outside again, barefoot now despite the chill, and heads toward a rocky outcrop that overlooks the harbor. The wind has shifted. It's now coming from the northeast, colder and more deliberate. Jan crouches near a rock fissure and closes his eyes. It's about where the salt sits in the breeze, he says. If the salt hits high on your nose, near the bridge, it's a dry wind. But if you feel it down by the tip, that's a wet wind. Wet winds bring storms. You try it. Deep breath. It just smells like cold air and regret. But Jan insists it's there, like a note in a song only old ears hear. Then he shows you the dried cod trick. No joke, he takes a strip of dried cod and hangs it from a stick like a fishy windsock. If it stays stiff, fair weather. If it curls like a witch's finger, rain by morning. You raise an eyebrow, but he shrugs. Better than your phone, no? And honestly, he's not wrong. Iceland's weather apps are a roulette wheel with better graphics. Back inside, he pulls out a battered journal. Not his own, but his father's, filled with weather notes, drawings, and lines of old Icelandic rhymes used for forecasting. You flip through pages that say things like, when the sea tastes of copper and the sheep face west, tie down the roofs. If gulls fly backwards and cats stay indoors, fetch your prayers. These aren't science, but they are knowledge compressed into folklore, because that's how information survived when paper didn't. And buried in all the rhymes and riddles is a core truth. Weather is not random. It's just rude, and it speaks a dialect you have to live with for decades to understand. John shares stories from the 1920s when some fishers believed that the sea itself grew angry when someone lied. Boats sank not because of storms, but because a crewman had broken a promise. The water knows, Jan says simply. Always does. That kind of belief kept people honest, whether out of fear or respect. Who's to say? Later, over a bowl of warm barley porridge, he tells you about the time the weather changed mid-voyage, not once, but 3 times. Sun, snow, and then fog, so thick I couldn't see my oar. His voice softens. But I knew because the air lost its rhythm. It stopped dancing. It held its breath. And maybe that's the best description you've heard yet. That storms don't start with thunder. They start when the world forgets to breathe. You sleep in a cot by the hearth that night, the walls humming gently with wind. The roof groans now and then, and you think about how strange it is that people have survived here for over 1,000 years. Not by fighting the weather, but by listening to it, by sniffing the sea, watching gulls, trusting itchy ears and salty breezes, and maybe by whispering to the air in return. Morning arrives like a yawn. You blink awake to a pale light filtering through a fish skin window pane. The air smells faintly of ash and peat smoke, with just a whisper of dried cod lingering near your cot. John's already gone, of course. Probably halfway down the cliff path, arguing with a raven or licking sea foam to predict humidity. You pull on your boots and head outside, crunching through frost-kissed grass as the world slowly unfurls. Down by the shore, the tide is stretching itself out, exposing slick rocks and tangled knots of seaweed. Jan stands ankle-deep in the cold shallows, muttering Icelandic under his breath like he's sweet-talking the waves. He glances back. Come, today you learn the tongue of fish. Not metaphorical, he means it. Apparently, certain fish, especially cod, were said to speak in subtle ways, not with voices, don't worry, no talking fish here, but with texture, temperature, and gill response. Before barometers and Doppler radar, fishers swore they could predict incoming storms by gutting their catch and paying close attention to the liver. If it's pale and swollen, stay home, Jan says, brandishing a not-quite-fresh cod with a theatrical flair. If it's firm and ruddy, you've got a window. This isn't just a local quirk. Across fishing cultures from Iceland to Japan to coastal Chile, fisherfolk have looked inside their catch for clues about the weather. Some even claimed that the scent of the fish changed before a storm, more metallic, more bitter. Historians still argue whether these were legitimate biological responses to barometric pressure or just convenient myths that became survival tools. Either way, Jan's grandfather would never set sail before inspecting a bucket of fish guts. Imagine trying to explain that to your modern weather app. You watch him slice open another cod, gently as if performing a sacred ritual. He leans in close, sniffs the gills. Cold front, from the west, 12 hours. You raise your eyebrows. You'll see, he shrugs. Later that morning, you follow John up the cliffs again, but this time, not to gaze at clouds or winds. Today's lesson is auditory. There's a deep fissure in the rock near his home, almost like a throat in the earth. Jan calls it Ve's ear, named after the Norse god of sacred spaces. According to local tradition, the sound of the wind as it passes through this chasm tells you what's coming. A low hum means steady skies. A sharp whistle? Brace yourself. He kneels beside it, eyes closed, listening, then gestures for you to try. You kneel, tilt your ear, and for a moment, silence. Then a faint moan, like the sea sighing in its sleep. That's not bad, Jan says approvingly. She's dreaming, but not angry. It sounds like nonsense. And yet there's something undeniably true about the way the wind shifts pitch through the fissure, how it carries mood and rhythm. It's like the ocean's breath has learned to sing. Jan shares another story, this one about a man named Paul, a legendary fisher from the 1800s who, according to local lore, could predict the weather 3 days ahead by tapping driftwood. Not listening to it. Tapping it. Apparently, the wood would vibrate differently depending on the moisture in the air. He used to say, "If it thumps like a drunk sheep, sail tomorrow. If it sings like a widow, stay home." You both laugh. Icelandic metaphors are an art form. Jan grows quiet for a moment, then adds, "Paul died at sea." You raise an eyebrow. He got lazy, stopped listening. Ah, you spend the afternoon watching the sea with new eyes. You've stopped thinking of the weather as a passive background force. Now it feels personal, like it's alive, playful, vindictive, moody, and above all, watching you back. The clouds begin to gather, just as Jan said they would. Not dramatic thunderheads, but a soft thickening of the sky, like a wool sweater being pulled slowly across the horizon. The wind tastes slightly metallic now, and when you hold your hand out, You swear the air feels heavier. The sea darkens not because the sun has left, but because it's holding something back. Waiting. Jan nods. She's turning. You ask if there were ever people who tried to chart all of this, catalog the signs, make a science out of sniffing the sea. He nods. In the early 20th century, a group of Icelandic scholars began compiling weather lore from old fishers. They documented everything: smells, sounds, how sea foam settled near rocks, how seals behaved before storms. One of them, a woman named Sigridor, created a full calendar of smell days, times of year, when the sea's scent changed predictably, indicating seasonal shifts. Her theories were dismissed by meteorologists at the time, of course. Too poetic, not enough graphs. But sailors trusted her. Some of her predictions were more accurate than the Danish Weather Bureau, John says with a grin, but she didn't own a tie, so they ignored her. Fishers still talk about her in hushed tones, like she was part witch, part wave. Jan shows you one of her charts later that night, hand-drawn symbols marking ocean moods with notes like copper mist and eel breath wind. It's beautiful and kind of genius. By now, the rain has started soft at first, like pinpricks on your coat. Jan holds out his hand, catches a drop, sniffs it. Not angry rain, he says, just bored. You both laugh, and you realize something. All this sniffing and listening and tapping driftwood isn't really about prediction. It's about attention. When you live at the edge of the world between volcanic cliffs and black water, nature doesn't owe you anything. You survive by noticing. Every smell, every sound, every twitch of a fishtail, because nature will whisper to you, but only if you shut up and listen. The rain doesn't pound its seeps. A steady drizzle that turns the rocks slick and the air into something you could almost chew. Jan calls it dagrigningin, the sneaky rain. It doesn't flood, doesn't roar, but it'll soak your bones if you give it the chance. It's the kind of rain Icelandic fishers respect most, not for its violence but for its patience. You trudge uphill through the wet morning mist. The trail is half mud, half seafoam slush. Jan says you're headed to meet someone important, a man named Christian, who still does things the old way. You expect another coastal shack, but instead you arrive at what looks like an ancient turf hut, hunched in the grass like a sleeping beast. Smoke coils lazily from a stone chimney. Christian greets you with a nod and a face that looks carved from basalt. His hands are knotted like driftwood and he barely speaks, but his eyes sparkle in a way that makes you nervous. He's the kind of man who probably hears fish gossip in his dreams. He motions you inside. The hut smells like salt, old rope, and dried fish oil. On the wall, bundles of seaweed tied in knots. On the table, a bowl of crushed shells and what looks suspiciously like dried seagull poop. Jan whispers, "It's not, probably." Comforting. Christian picks up one of the seaweed bundles and holds it to his nose. He sniffs deeply, then turns to you. "Eftir hadegi," he mutters. Afternoon. Jan grins. Rain will break. Cloud gap around 2 o'clock. You check your watch. It's 10:41. You sit with them in silence as Christian works. He unties the knots in the seaweed one by one, as if undoing some ancient code. Turns out it is a code. Each knot was tied based on the smell of the sea on different mornings. Dried seaweed retains scent better than almost anything, apparently. If it smells more sour or metallic after a few days, it means a shift in wind is coming. He's tracking history by nostril. Historians still argue whether seaweed-based forecasting was real or just Icelandic folklore taken too seriously. There's no scientific study confirming it, but then again, no one has really studied it. It's hard to get research funding when your thesis is sniffing kelp with Grandpa. Christian points to a larger, not deep green with a white crust. He waves it near your nose. It smells like rust, seawater, and something slightly sweet. Storm broken, wind wrong, he says in English so gravelly you wonder if the rock outside taught him. It's strange, sitting here watching two grown men read the future in seaweed like it's a newspaper horoscope. And yet you feel it again, that creeping sense that this isn't superstition. It's skill. It's memory. A way of mapping a world too wild for math. You learn that Christian also records seagull behavior. Apparently, when gulls stop hovering and start sitting in tight clusters, it means low pressure is squeezing in. He once stayed ashore for 2 days based entirely on seagull huddle math. The other fishers laughed until their boats got hammered by a rogue squall. By noon, the rain does, in fact, ease. Clouds pull apart like cotton. Jan raises a hand. Told you. You don't even argue anymore. You walk together down to the docks. A few boats are tied there, their hulls slick with rain. You hear gulls squawking, but they're not flying, they're sitting. Clustered, restless. Jan watches them. Wind might turn. You glance back at the clearing sky. It's sunny. He shrugs. Sky lies. Gulls don't. This, you're starting to realize, is the heart of Icelandic weather watching. Don't trust the surface, not the clouds, not the temperature, not even the sun. You have to watch the others, the birds, the fish, the seaweed. Everything else knows before you do. You mention modern forecasting again, asking if any of these traditions have been passed into Iceland's current meteorological systems. John chuckles. Officially? No. Unofficially? He nods toward the harbor. Ask any Coast Guard pilot. They all know a Christian. Turns out, even modern weather stations in Iceland sometimes call up old-timers before a major sea event. Not because they're desperate, but because the old guys notice things satellites can't. Things that don't show up in cloud imaging or wind vectors, like seal confusion or mist that smells like pennies. Some of it even made its way into academic journals. In the 1990s, a young Icelandic scientist published a small paper on olfactory maritime indicators. It didn't exactly go viral, but it did raise eyebrows. His conclusion: while there's no proof that smell alone can predict weather, experienced noses can detect subtle changes in moisture, pressure, and salt density that correlate with storm fronts. It's not magic. It's micro-sensing. You sit for a while beside the boats, watching the horizon breathe. The sea has relaxed again, slipping back into its mild, rocking rhythm. A lone puffin flies overhead, cartoonish and ridiculous. Jan watches it go. If he's out now, he says, we'll be fine till nightfall. You ask if puffins are good predictors. He shrugs. Not really. They're idiots. But they hate rain, so if he's flying, we're probably clear. It's all so beautifully inconsistent. One day it's fish guts. The next, it's seaweed and seagull politics. And somehow, it works. Not because any one trick is perfect, but because together they form a net of signs, stories, and instincts that help you read a living ocean. Christian says goodbye without words. Just a firm grip of your shoulder and a nod. You feel honored. Or possibly cursed. Hard to tell. On the walk back, Jan gets reflective. We didn't always write this stuff down, he says. That was the point. You had to listen to learn it. Had to stay still, stay quiet. Let the world teach you. He pauses. You're getting better at that. The wind picks up again, not strong, but new. It carries the scent of iron and moss, and maybe something else, something older. You breathe it in, slow and deep, And this time, you don't ask what it means. You're awake earlier today, before yawn even knocks. The air smells sharper, like the wind borrowed a blade overnight. It slices through the morning mist, cold and direct, and you pull your sweater tight around your ribs as you step outside. The clouds are scattered this time, not heavy, but they move with purpose, fast and low, like they've got somewhere better to be. Jan raises an eyebrow as you meet him at the dock. "You smell that?" he asks. You nod, even though you're not sure what that is. He smiles. Exactly. Today's lesson isn't about fish or birds or seaweed. It's about what Jan calls the sneaky pressure drop. The silent shift before a storm, when everything feels off. He says that in Iceland, the most dangerous weather comes with the least warning, especially in winter. And while it's summer now, he wants you to feel what the ancestors felt when the signs began to whisper. He leads you along the shore, not talking much, just listening. The sea is choppy, but not angry. The wind flutters in inconsistent bursts. Jan stops at a shallow tide pool, kneels, and dips 2 fingers into the water. Then he sniffs them. "Warm," he says. You raise an eyebrow. "That's bad?" He shrugs. "Should be cold. If it's warm this early, currents are shifting. Maybe something big coming in from the southeast." He points to a set of jagged cliffs in the distance. Storms crawl over those cliffs like drunks trying to sneak home. You hike higher today, into the mossy hills that overlook the bay. The ground here is softer, springier. Patches of purple wildflowers sway violently in sudden gusts. Birds dart low to the ground. Jan notices. Low flight means high pressure slipping. Apparently, birds hate flying through turbulence. When they stick close to the earth, it often means wind at higher altitudes is getting chaotic. And when paired with sudden warmth in the tide pools, that's the cocktail Jan's father used to call death soup weather. Cheery. Historians still argue whether early Icelandic communities truly understood atmospheric pressure in the modern sense, or if they just noticed animal behavior and ran with it. Either way, it worked. Records from 13th century Icelandic monasteries mention cloud sickness and earth yawns phrases thought to describe the pressure-induced headaches and subtle air tension locals felt before major blizzards or volcanic activity. Modern science calls it barometric response. Ancient Icelanders called it weather whispering. You reach a stone outcrop and sit. From here, you can see the whole coastline. Jan pulls out a small notebook, leather-bound, stained, and full of scrawls. "Every fisher keeps one," he says. "Not just for tides or catches, but feelings, smells, shadows, stuff no one else sees." He lets you flip through it. One page reads, "July 3rd, sea green too light, gulls sat low, no thunder, but cats ran. Wind turned wrong by midnight." "Cats?" Jan shrugs. "Mine always hides before storms. Smart girl." The page from last year ends with, "Nosebleed, then fog. Do not go out." Okay then. Apparently, some locals track their own physical reactions, nosebleeds, migraines, even random joint pain, as early storm indicators. And while it sounds superstitious, medical researchers have actually studied barometric pressure's effect on humans. Shifts in pressure can trigger headaches, inflammation, mood swings, even anxiety spikes. Jan thinks it's all connected. "You're part of the system," he says, "not above it. Storms move through you too." That sticks with you. He points out something else, how the clouds are no longer floating, they're crawling. They hug the contours of the hills, pulling downward like wet fabric. That's a classic Icelandic signal. Sinking clouds equals climbing pressure imbalance. It doesn't guarantee a storm, but it means nature is reorganizing itself. and that never happens for fun. There's a bird small brown, jittery that won't stop squawking. Jan watches it. He's warning somebody, he says. Might be us. He's joking. Maybe. Down by the fjord, you spot fishermen bringing in their lines early. They don't yell or rush, but they move with that quiet urgency that comes from knowing. Jan gives a small nod of respect. They smell it too. You ask how early people passed this knowledge along. Was there a school? A ritual? He chuckles. Nah, you just grew up in it. If your grandfather took you out and your boat flipped, you learned real quick to notice the weird gull that wasn't circling that morning. It's a different kind of science, one that doesn't use formulas but failure, memory, and generations of pattern matching. And like all good scientists, Icelandic Fishos kept refining their hypotheses. They noticed when the old tricks didn't work anymore. Some even wrote in their notebooks things like, "Seaweed lied today," or "Gulls useless this week." You ask if Jan ever misreads the signs. All the time, he says. But I write it down, so next time I remember the lie too. The wind shifts, again. Now from the north. It carries the smell of cold and metal. Jan closes his notebook. We go now. You follow him down the hill, faster this time. No storm yet, but you feel it. Something curling at the edge of the horizon, waiting. Not ominous, just inevitable. Back at the cottage, you light the stove and watch Jan tie down a few tools outside. No panic, just respect. He sets an old brass barometer on the windowsill. The needle dips slightly. He nods, unsurprised. The last thing he does is light a piece of driftwood. Smell that? He asks. You nod. It's earthy, smoky, a little sweet. If storm hits, burn this again. Keeps your nose honest. You're not sure what that means, but you'll remember. As night falls, you sit by the fire and think of all the things Jan taught you to notice. The smell of tide pools, the weight of the wind, the gossip of seagulls. Nothing definitive, but together, a language. And now you know just enough to listen. The wind doesn't howl that night, it hums, a slow, teeth-on-glass vibration that threads through the window panes and nestles into your dreams. You wake once or twice, unsure if it's rain tapping or your imagination crawling across the roof. But by morning, the wind is gone, totally gone. And that, Jan tells you over a steaming mug of coffee, is the worst sign of all. Storm's waiting, he mutters, looking out the window like it owes him money. That quiet, that's her pulling in breath. You step outside and understand what he means. The sea is flat, unnaturally flat, like someone turned it off. No gulls, no breeze. Even the usual creak of dock ropes has gone silent. Your boots echo on the boardwalk like you're walking through a soundproofed memory. Jan calls it the hold. Old Icelanders used to believe that the sea paused just before it punished. That it had to gather itself like a mouth gathering spit before spitting. There's a word for this in one of the sagas, logmol, which roughly translates to the lull that kills. You and Jan sit near the waterline, eating dried haddock and waiting. Waiting is a core part of being Icelandic, apparently. Waiting for weather, waiting for fish, waiting for the sky to remember. It has plans. The clouds have returned, but they're bloated, hanging heavy like forgotten laundry. The air has a new taste now, bitter and almost dusty. Jan breaks a small twig from a nearby shrub, crushes it, and sniffs. Still not right. Then he points out something strange. The seabirds that do appear aren't diving. They're hovering, uncertain, dipping low, pulling back. Even the terns, usually bold and aggressive, are hesitant. It's as if nature itself can't read its own signals. Sometimes, Jan says, the storm doesn't even know what kind of storm it wants to be. There's something unnerving about that, not because it implies danger, but because it suggests confusion. And when the ocean's confused, it's rarely good news for the people living near it. You walk further inland today toward an old abandoned hut nestled in a fold between two hills. Jan says it once belonged to a widow who was known as a vidurkunur, a weather woman. In old Icelandic communities, people like her held a strange place in society. Not exactly witches, not quite scientists, but somewhere in between. They watched clouds the way priests read scripture. They claimed to hear warnings in the way kelp crackled or milk soured. Historians still argue whether these women were respected seers or just eccentric loners with good instincts and bad reputations, but records show some were consulted by entire fishing crews before major voyages. One journal even records a captain refusing to leave despite clear skies, simply because the vidurkunur sneezed 3 times in a row. You step inside the collapsed hut. The roof is gone, but the walls still hum with salt. There's a faint outline on one stone, almost like a rune, or maybe just moss trying to be meaningful. John tells you that even today some Icelandic sailors have weather charms passed down through family. Bits of carved bone or twisted rope, kept in coat pockets or sewn into the lining of hats. They're not always talked about, but they're there. And whether or not they work doesn't really matter. It's not about the charm, he says. It's about who gave it to you. You spend the rest of the day helping Jan check the moorings. Every rope is tightened, every board secured. He taps each post with his knuckles like he's asking them to hang on a little longer. Then he points out another phenomenon. Look at the sea foam, he says. You do. It's forming strange rings, small, uneven circles that collapse too quickly. According to Jan, that pattern means mixed air temperatures. And when cold air and warm water bicker long enough, storms are their angry children. Science agrees with that, mostly. When warm air masses slam into cold fronts over the North Atlantic, the clash can spin cyclones into existence. These systems sometimes evolve into what meteorologists call bomb cyclones, storms that deepen rapidly and hit fast. The pressure drops, the winds scream, and ships disappear without drama or farewell. But Jan isn't a meteorologist. He's a guy with a strong nose and a gut full of instincts. And right now, his gut says soon. That night, Jan teaches you one last trick. He pulls out a thin piece of animal gut dry, transparent, brittle. Old storm glass, he says. Before glass, we used these. He hangs it by the window. Over the next hour, you watch as moisture begins to bead along the surface. The edges curl, the middle bows slightly. John smiles, not because he's happy, but because he's been proven right again. The barometer dips further. The clouds finally start to move again, north to south this time. The wind returns, gentle at first, but full of teeth. You feel it in your chest, that hush before the song, the moment before a sneeze, nature about to exhale. Jan stands at the door as you settle in for the night. Tomorrow you'll see what all this fuss was about, he says. The real storm signs come after the silence. You ask him if he's nervous. He grins. Only if the birds start singing again. And with that, he leaves you to the wind, the rattling driftwood charm above your bed, and the creeping promise of chaos brewing just over the sea. The storm doesn't announce itself with lightning. It doesn't tear through the sky in a flashy blaze or arrive with cinematic thunder. Instead, it begins with a sound. Not the howling of wind, but a low groan, like the world rolling over in its sleep. The kind of sound you feel before you hear. Floorboards twitch, window panes press outward, then settle. It's like the pressure in the room has changed, like the weather has entered the house before the rain even begins. Outside, the sea is no longer still, not violent either yet, but restless. The surface churns like a dream gone sour, and every few minutes a rogue wave slaps the shoreline harder than it should. You see John standing at the edge of the dock, head cocked, mouth slightly open, listening. "It's testing the fences," he mutters, like a dog. You join him just in time to watch a string of gulls rise, circle once, then scatter inland. The sky is that sickly gray-yellow, tinged with something almost green. The clouds stretch low like they're trying to touch the water, and the temperature has dropped. Not freezing, just wrong. You sniff, but it's not fish or seaweed this time. The air smells like wet metal cold, sharp, unfamiliar. John confirms it. That's copper, means she's pulling heat from the ground now. And that's when things truly begin to shift. Rain arrives without warning. No gentle patter, just a curtain drawn suddenly across the world. It's horizontal, wind-driven, and vicious. It doesn't fall on you. It assaults you. Within seconds, your coat is soaked, your boots squelch, and the dock feels like it's swaying beneath you. John yells something over the roar, but the words are swept away. You retreat to the boathouse, which now groans with every gust. The walls seem to breathe, in and out, in and out. Water seeps in from every crack, trickling along the floor in thin, winding fingers. The little fish bones hanging from the rafters clink softly, as if applauding the chaos outside. Historically, storms like this weren't just nuisances, they were town shakers. In the early 1800s, records show entire hamlets wiped off the map by sudden surges from the North Atlantic. Even today, certain weather formations, like a low-pressure center deepening over Greenland, can trigger sting jets, a narrow band of insanely strong wind that descends like a fist. Meteorologists still argue whether the Icelandic knock-you-flat storms of the past were really sting jets or something else entirely. But survivors' journals talk about walls of air that felt solid, lifting cows off fields and flipping boats in harbor without touching the water. It's those kinds of stories that turn scientific phenomena into legend, and Iceland has legends to spare. John tells you of the Hafgufa, an ancient sea monster believed to resemble a massive whale, but capable of creating whirlpools that dragged ships under. In older texts, storms were sometimes blamed on its breath. Fishers who offended the sea might attract its gaze. You joke about offering it a fish stick, and Jan, soaked and half-smiling, says, "Just don't give it cod. Too common." A sudden thud against the side of the boathouse breaks the moment, a piece of driftwood hurled inland. The wind screams like a living thing, and for the first time you feel genuine nerves. "This isn't the real wind," John says calmly. "That's coming soon." And he's right, because after the rain comes the twist. The storm changes direction. Like a dancer switching feet, the wind shifts from east to north in a matter of seconds, and everything you just secured is suddenly vulnerable from a different angle. The sound becomes higher, thinner, more desperate. You brace the door, but the latch snaps. John kicks it closed with one boot, wedging a crate against it. There's something about the energy now, kinetic, electric, like the whole landscape is vibrating. And then, silence. Not the same eerie stillness of the previous day. This one is taut, like a held breath right before a scream. You step outside and see something you don't expect. Snow. Tiny, swirling crystals caught up in the air's madness. It's July, but here it is, flakes dancing like ash, illuminated by the dock's flickering floodlight. Jan laughs, loud and sudden. "That's the trickster part," he says. "Icelandic weather always keeps one card hidden." The next gust nearly knocks you over, and now it begins in earnest. Waves slam the breakwall. Salt spray flies so high it mists the windows of the second floor. The sea looks alive, writhing, rising, reaching. Trees bend like dancers caught mid-bow. Somewhere, something metal peals like a gong. You spend hours inside, pacing, listening, occasionally napping upright. Jan brings dried meat and bottled water, and you both chew in silence like monks waiting out a prophecy. And all through it, the fish bones above you keep clinking. The charm Jan gave you, now tied around your wrist, feels heavier, not from water, from meaning. And then, just before dawn, it ends. No fade out. Just a sudden stop. The rain slows, the wind eases, the clouds lift like a curtain after a long, dramatic play. Outside, the sea still boils, but slower now, calmer, defeated maybe. A few gulls return, squawking as if gossiping about the night's destruction. Jan walks to the edge of the dock, squints toward the horizon, and sniffs. "Still stinks of salt," he says, "but she's breathing easy now." And you? You feel strangely awake, as if the storm cleared something inside you as well, something tight in the chest, something noisy in the brain. Maybe you do believe in weather people now. Dawn doesn't so much rise as unfold. The horizon, once a slash of black, slowly warms with the pinks and silvers of a sky trying to remember how to be calm. Waves still curl and break along the shore, but they do so now like someone sighing in their sleep, restless, but no longer angry. You step outside and feel it immediately. The air has changed. It's still cold, still damp, but it no longer carries that pulse, that predator's breath. Instead, it smells like soaked earth, algae, driftwood, and somewhere beneath all of that, a ghost of ozone. Like the sky has exhaled. Jan is already up, coffee in hand, squinting toward the sea. "That one was a proper growler," he mutters, handing you a steaming mug. "She had teeth." And just like that, the cleanup begins. Boats need unmooring, ropes need drying, nets, if they didn't blow away, need untangling. The dock is slick and littered with kelp, driftwood, and one sad sneaker. You and Jan step around puddles like landmines as gulls wheel overhead, yelling about who knows what. You start to ask how often storms like that roll in, but he interrupts. "You don't count 'em, you remember 'em." He gestures inland, to a hill where the wind-swept grass still leans like it's unsure whether to stand back up. "That's where my great-uncle's house used to be. Wasn't the storm that got it. Was the flood afterward. That was in 76, or maybe 74, depends on how many drinks you've had." That's the thing about weather in Iceland. It leaves imprints, not just in the soil, but in memory, in stories passed down like strange heirlooms. Some families pass on rings. Others? They pass on tales of that one time the barn door flew 200 meters and impaled a cow. Jan swears that happened. Historians, naturally, still argue whether cows were regular storm casualties or just especially unlucky. Back in the village, the streets are quieter than expected, not hushed with fear, just respectful. You get the sense that the people here treat storms the way medieval folks treated comets. Not omens exactly, but events you don't ignore, and that includes offering thanks when they pass. You walk with Jon to a small stone chapel on the edge of town. Inside, the floor creaks under your boots, and the air smells like wax and cedar. A candle burns at the front, not for God necessarily, but for luck, for the sea, for surviving another tantrum. John lights a second one and murmurs something under his breath. You don't ask what. It feels too personal. Afterward, he takes you up a narrow path behind the village. It winds through mossy outcrops and over a ridge where, he promises, you'll get the best look at what's left behind. And he's right. From up there, the ocean looks endless and tired. You can see where the surge crept inland, darkening patches of farmland like spilled ink. Fishing boats bob like toys far below, all of them accounted for or close enough. And the clouds, while still hanging heavy, are beginning to shred apart like wet paper. This is why we sniff, John says quietly beside you. It's not about fish or fame. It's about having 5 extra minutes to get out of the way. You ask if the smell really gave him a heads up this time. He nods. Wasn't just fish. Was the copper. Was the burn in the air. Means static. Means sudden pressure drop. Smells like the sky's about to bleed. And while you're up there, breathing in the aftermath, he tells you one more story. Back in the 1600s, a man named Hrafn of Breiðafjörður supposedly wrote down the first known description of storm scent detection. He wasn't a scientist, he was a dried fish merchant. But in his diaries, he wrote of a salt-sour sting that arrived before the clouds. He claimed it saved his crew from wreckage 3 times. His notes even describe how the smell would change depending on the storm's origin. North winds brought a sharpness, like vinegar. Southern gusts came with a musty, eggy scent. Modern scholars still debate whether Hrafn was recording olfactory weather phenomena or just listing excuses for late deliveries. But John insists the old man was right, and he might be, because from this hilltop you feel it too, a faint aroma, just at the edge of awareness. Not fish, not metal, just electric memory. Later, as you help clean up the harbor, someone brings out a battered radio and plays a little jazz. It feels almost indecent, like the storm's ghost might hear the trumpet and come back just to shut it off. But the sun's pushing through now, and it's hard not to feel grateful, even for the chaos. You're handed a sandwich made of something smoked and impossibly chewy. You chew thoughtfully, watching a young girl skip between puddles like nothing ever happened. That one was loud, she says matter-of-factly, but we've had louder. You ask her how she knew it was coming. She snorts. It stank, she says, like you've just asked if the sky was blue. And that really is the essence of it all. For centuries, Icelanders have looked beyond barometers and forecasts. They've sniffed the sea, read the clouds like hieroglyphs, listened to the way wind hits a window or the silence before the birds return. Not because it's romantic, but because it works. You start to think maybe that's the lesson here, not to fear the storm, but to recognize its breath. You spend the afternoon doing what everyone else is doing, patching, sweeping, salvaging, remembering. It's a verb that takes on new meaning here. To put things back together after a storm's tried to tear them limb from limb. The docks are surprisingly intact. A few planks missing, ropes snarled like spaghetti, but nothing that can't be fixed with enough hands and a bit of cursing. Someone jokes that the sea left a gift, a lobster trap half full, and clearly not from anyone's boat. It's like Poseidon tossed it up with a shrug, saying, "You lost one, here's one." By now you've earned a reputation, not as a local, but as the wide-eyed outsider who didn't die. High praise, honestly. One of the elders, a silver-bearded man named Erikur, waves you over. "You want to smell something?" he asks, eyes twinkling like he's offering treasure. Always a good way to start a conversation. He leads you behind the boathouse, where a heavy oilskin tarp covers what looks like a crate. He peels it back, and you're hit with a bouquet that's part museum, part bait shop, and part science lab that gave up halfway through. This, he declares, is my weather collection. Inside the crate are a series of glass jars, some sealed tight, others with cheesecloth over the top, each labeled in a shaky hand. July Storm 89, the Meltwater Breeze, Cod Bloom Day, and one ominously labeled, Don't Open This One. You ask, naturally, why anyone would bottle storm scents. To remember, Eriker says simply. To train your nose. Like old dogs and shoes, you get used to the rhythms. You lift one labeled Equinox Salt. It smells like wet stone and bruised kelp. Sharp, but not unpleasant. Another smells like singed feathers and rust. A third? Moldy bread, lemon peel, and lightning. Historians don't believe me, Eriker admits. Say smells can't be stored, but I say memory has a nose. And just when you're about to ask how this all started, he tells you the strangest part yet. Apparently, in the 1800s, a naturalist named Solveig Jonsdottir kept detailed journals of air moods. She was fascinated by how animals and people reacted to weather long before it arrived. Her entries describe a crispness like cut apples before hail, and a mildew note before fog that chokes the hills. Most scientists ignored her work. Some even mocked her, calling it weather witchery. But locals loved her. Farmers would visit her home before harvests. Fishermen would bring her seaweed, asking her to smell its plans. The funny thing, some of her predictions were so accurate that rival villages accused her of sorcery. She wasn't punished. This wasn't Salem, but her notes were lost for a while. Rediscovered in a barn attic in the 1950s, they now sit in Reykjavik's Museum of the Senses, filed under Miscellaneous Weather Ephemera. You blink. Eriker grins. We know things they don't write in books, he says. And he's right. Because when you walk through the village again, every smell tells you something. Freshly split wood means someone's repairing storm shutters. Singed peat? The baker's firing up the oven again. Even the tang of vinegar on the breeze signals someone pickling cabbage storm prep never truly ends. By evening, the clouds finally let go of their grudge. A faint, hesitant sun creeps through, casting golden veins across the damp village. Children chase each other between puddles while their parents mend fences and sip coffee. It's not celebratory, it's ritual. This is what comes next. At the edge of town, you find Jon leaning against a shed, a notebook balanced on one knee. You journal? You ask, surprised. He shrugs. I log smells. You laugh, but he's serious. You forget fast, he says. Storms are like dreams, big and loud while they're here, but slippery after, unless you write it down. He flips to a fresh page and scribbles, storm scent, fish rot plus copper plus ozone plus burnt salt. Warm wind, 2 gulls didn't return. Aunt Sigridor says it smelled like old coins under a bed. You watch him underline the last sentence twice. That's the part that matters, he adds. The weird bit. That's where the truth hides. And you start to realize this isn't folklore. It's survival disguised as poetry. Dinner that night is shared among neighbors. Someone roasts fish. Someone else brings black rye bread so dense it might be a building material. There's laughter, teasing, one attempted accordion solo, and a joke about the mayor still believing in wind gods. Jon raises a glass. To storms, he says, for letting us notice each other again. You clink glasses. The drink tastes like brine and herbs, maybe moss. Later, as the stars peek through tatters of leftover cloud, you step outside alone. The night is colder now, still damp, but the wind is soft again, carrying nothing more than pine smoke and distant surf. You close your eyes and breathe deeply, not because you're sniffing for danger anymore, but because finally, The scent of peace has returned. You wake to something you didn't expect. Silence. No thrashing wind, no metallic clang of rigging, no storm-muttered threats sliding under doorways, just the creak of beams settling and the sleepy shuffle of boots on gravel. It's the kind of quiet that feels earned, like a favor granted after days of tension. You stretch beneath woolen covers, reluctant to leave the warm cocoon. But curiosity is louder than comfort, and so you shuffle into your coat and head outside. Jonah's already up, naturally. He's crouched beside the dock, gently untying lines that had been cinched double during the storm. His fingers move with the kind of practiced calm that suggests everything's under control. "You want to come check the nets?" he asks, not even looking up. You nod. Of course you do. The boat ride is gentler this time. No angry sea. Just a hush of swells, a slow rhythm like the village itself is still exhaling. Sunlight slices through clouds like a lazy sword, turning the water into sheeted silver. You trail your fingers in the sea, and it feels alive but not hostile, like it remembers but forgives. At the first buoy, Jan cuts the motor and leans over. Together, you pull the net, inch by inch. What comes up isn't just fish. There are oddities, shards of porcelain from long-sunken ships, a warped spoon, a clump of seaweed tangled around something that might be a baby's shoe. Jan inspects it all with the same even interest. "Storm stirs the memory of the sea," he says. "You never know what it'll spit back." You pause over a glimmer in the mesh, a coin, smooth and darkened, but unmistakably foreign. Not Icelandic, not recent, maybe Spanish, maybe cursed, probably both. "Storm tax," Jan says. "Sea takes, sea gives." Back on land, he tells you more about these peculiar gifts. Villagers call them Draugaslode ghost trails, items the sea offers up when it's particularly stirred. Not just debris, objects that feel weighted, like they still belong to someone. You pass by a shed where a collection has begun. A storm-curated museum, rusted buckles, oil lamps, carved bone, tangled nets too ancient to date, each item tagged with where and when it washed up. No one claims them, but no one throws them away either. Historians still debate whether these finds are real-time flukes, Jan says, or if the sea remembers shipwrecks and old migrations and just curates. There's a story he tells you then, about a boat lost in 1723 off the coast during an unexpected blizzard. Nothing was ever found until 200 years later, when a fisherman pulled up a waterlogged Bible with the captain's name still legible in ink that hadn't run. They say the man who found it went mute for a year, not out of fear, just awe. You ask if he believes the sea can remember. He doesn't answer right away. Then, "I believe we remember through it." And it makes a strange kind of sense, because the village doesn't just exist beside the sea, it exists with it, as if every part of life is tuned to its moods, its temper, its small, briny kindnesses. Fishers don't talk much during storms, but they listen, not just to the wind, but to the way it sounds through certain rock formations, or how the birds huddle, or how the seals stop singing. Apparently, one old woman long gone now could predict hailstorms based on how her bread dough rose. Locals swore by her. They called it baker's barometry. And sure, modern tools have made it easier. Radar, satellites, weather apps. But John shrugs at them. They'll tell you when it rains, not what kind. By afternoon, the town slowly transforms from recovery to rhythm. Nets are untangled, lines are coiled. Children help scrub boats while their parents stitch tiers and canvas sails. The smell of tar and fish oil returns, not aggressive, but comforting. Like furniture polish for the soul, you help where you can. Carry buckets, ferry tools, hold things steady. Nobody asks you to, but nobody stops you either. That night, as the sky blazes with a weirdly neon sunset storm, remnants swirling up in pink and lavender, there's a quiet celebration. Not a festival, just a meal shared outdoors, benches pulled close, stories passed around like salt shakers. Someone plays a bowed psaltery, a sound like wind through harp strings. Another tells the tale of a man who could read the future in the foam left behind by breaking waves. You laugh, maybe louder than you mean to, and no one shushes you, because here, even your joy gets absorbed into the landscape. Later, while sipping something strong and herbal that makes your ears buzz, you feel it. That strange moment when you stop being an outsider. You ask Jon, softly, "How do you know when a storm's really over?" He nods toward the horizon. When the sea stops talking back. And sure enough, the water is quiet now. No whispers, no threats, just hush. The next morning, the air smells like forgiveness. Not just because the storm is truly gone, but because the village has moved forward as it always does, without drama, without ceremony, just quiet momentum. And somehow, you move with it. You're invited to join Jon and two others, Anna and her younger brother Karian, a hike inland, not for any special reason, just to stretch the sea out of our legs, Jon says with a smirk. So you pack a little food, slip into borrowed boots, still damp from someone else's storm adventure, and set off. The landscape turns wild within minutes. Gone is the flat, salt-dusted coast. Now you're climbing through moss-draped lava fields, where the earth seems to breathe and twitch beneath your soles. It's like walking on the scalp of some long-dead giant. You ask how people navigated this kind of terrain without maps or landmarks. Anna answers first. "By nose," she says. "You can smell different directions." You think she's joking. She's not. "You learn the way peat smells when it's west-facing," Jon adds, "or how steam rises differently from warm springs near the mountains. And if you get high enough, you can taste snow in the wind before you see it." And there it is again, that strange, precise intimacy Icelanders have with the land and weather. Not just reacting to it, but reading it, like a language learned in childhood and rarely written down. Halfway up a slope, you pass a fissure that locals call Moonlight Mist's Edge. It's said to hum when barometric pressure drops sharply. You put your ear close, and there it is, a low, vibrating moan, like a cello being played underwater. Historians still argue whether these rock sounds were used for early weather predictions, Kari chimes in. Some say it's folklore, others think it's proto-seismology. And you? You're starting to believe the rock is alive, or at least very nosy. At the top of the rise, the wind picks up, cooler now. You look down and see the village as if it's been stitched into a quilt of sea and grass. Chimneys puff lazy smoke. The dock gleams. The paths shimmer like veins. It looks peaceful. More than that, it looks earned. You rest there, sharing flatbread and thick cheese. Kari tells the story of a famous fisher who disappeared in 1852, only to reappear 20 years later on a different island, unchanged, confused, claiming it was still the same day. It's a popular ghost story, but some take it seriously. There's a theory involving rogue waves, amnesia, and a smuggler's cave with unusually high radon levels. The wind shifts again. Anna lifts her nose. 3 days till drizzle, she says confidently. You blink. How can you possibly know that? She shrugs. Smells like it. You think she's joking again. She isn't. The descent is easier. You pass sheep with expressions that suggest they're deeply unimpressed by your hiking skills. One stares you down for a full 30 seconds before sneezing and wandering off. Back in the village, the fishers are preparing the boats again. Not frantically, just with that slow, methodical rhythm they do everything with. As if weather is never a surprise, only a mood shift. You walk with Jan to a tiny house nestled beside a crumbling basalt cliff. Inside, there's a room full of barometers, hundreds maybe. Some glass, some brass, some carved into wood like old saints, all ticking, all humming. "This was my grandfather's," he says. "He never trusted just one reading, always needed the choir." You ask why they're still here, still working. "Because sometimes one sings out of tune," he says. "And if you're lucky, you hear it." He shows you one that's slightly cracked. It's mercury sluggish. "That one saved us during the winter of '83. Said the wind was coming from nowhere. It was right." You run your fingers along the glass. It's cool but not cold, like it's thinking. Jean leans against the doorway. The sea talks, but sometimes so does the air. And then he hands you a small leather-bound notebook. Inside are weather notes, dates, sketches, wind directions, pressure readings, notes like "smelled like metal before the snow," or "ravens flew low today, fish will stay deep." It's his, or was. Now it's yours. For when you forget what the sea is saying, he says. That night, you read through it by the dull orange glow of a whale oil lamp. The notes are sparse but evocative. There's poetry in the brevity. "Clouds flared west," grandmother said, "bake extra." Eiderduck's restless gut says, "Don't sail." You fall asleep halfway through, the notebook resting on your chest like a pet, and in your dreams, the sea does talk. But it doesn't shout. It hums. It murmurs about ships and nets, about salt and stars, about how it isn't cruel, just ancient, and how anyone who thinks they've mastered it is due a soaking. The next day, the drizzle arrives, right on schedule. It's your last morning in the village, though no one says so aloud. Not out of avoidance, more like superstition. To name an ending is to make it heavier. And here, things just ebb and flow, just like the sea. You wake to the familiar percussion of rain on turf. Not hard, but persistent. The kind of rain that doesn't ruin plans, it just changes the pace of them. Soft, fine droplets drifting sideways in the wind, misting the windows and brushing your skin like breath. The village is quieter than usual. Boats are still docked, their tarps ballooning gently with every gust. Even the gulls seem subdued. Somewhere in the distance, a child laughs, and it feels like the bell of a church you didn't know existed. You dress slowly. There's no rush. You're on Iceland time now, measured not in hours, but in shifts of weather and the mood of the clouds. When you step outside, Jan is waiting. Of course he is, holding 2 mugs of something warm and vaguely moss-flavored. He doesn't offer one, just hands it to you, like this was always going to happen. "Smell that?" he says. You nod automatically, then pause. "What am I smelling?" He considers. Wet wool, salt, maybe the ghost of herring, but mostly the wind is trying to decide if it wants to change. And you do smell it. A flicker of something sweet on the breeze, undercut with the metallic tang of cloud shift. The pressure behind your eyes tells you something stirring. Nothing dramatic, just the sea rolling its shoulders. Together you wander toward the harbor. There's a small shack near the end of the dock where retired fishers gather. They call it the Weather Parliament. No one agrees on much, but everyone listens. Inside, it's like stepping into a museum curated by the climate itself. Ropes dried stiff with decades of salt. Tiny whale bones strung like wind chimes. A wooden figurehead with no ship to guard. And in the center, a round table cluttered with instruments, barometers, thermometers, a cracked shell that someone insists whistles when gales approach. You recognize one of the men from your first day. He greets you with a grunt, then points at a strip of dried cod pinned to the wall. "Storm scale," he says. The cod jerky has been scored with years of marks. Each represents a time it twisted or flaked oddly just before a big blow. You stare at it, unsure if you're being pranked. "You laugh," another elder says, "but that fish saved my uncle from a sudden squall in '72. You look again. The cod is curling slightly at the edge today. Someone jots that down in chalk. Historians still argue whether these folk techniques actually held predictive value, John murmurs, watching you watch. But it doesn't matter to us. Belief is its own kind of barometer. You nod. It makes a weird kind of sense. In a place where GPS can glitch and forecasts lie, sometimes all you've got is dried fish and intuition. A woman named Sigga shows you her weather journal. It's hand-bound, leather-soft, with years of oil and sun. She's been recording for 43 years. Her symbols are cryptic spirals, dots, what looks like angry potatoes, but she reads them like sheet music. "It's not just for me," she says. "It's for the sea to know it's being watched." That idea sticks with you. Outside, the drizzle thickens to fog. Not scary fog storybook fog, the kind that makes you believe in trolls and lost villages. You walk the shore one last time. Seaweed crackles beneath your boots. Somewhere to your right, a seal lifts its head, regards you with mild disdain, then disappears. You find yourself talking softly, to no one in particular, maybe to the wind. "I'll remember this," you say, "the fish, the clouds, the way everything smelled like time." The wind doesn't answer, but it does seem to shift, just a little. Back at your borrowed cottage, your pack waits. Jan has left a note inside. "Don't wait for storms to tell you you're alive. Sniff the air, trust the weird signs, and come back." You smile. Fold the note. Tuck it into the weather journal he gave you earlier. Then you pause and sniff. The air smells like basalt warmed by rain, like fish stew and wool and peat smoke, and just beneath it, like adventure. The drive back is slow, and you're grateful for it. The gravel road out of the village feels narrower than you remember. Maybe it's the mist, or maybe it's your reluctance. Every dip and bend now carries a story. The rock where you first heard seals, the bend where a raven startled you, the moss that never dried. You're not just leaving Iceland, you're leaving a version of yourself that only existed here. You roll down the window. The air is brisk, wet, and full of memory. The sheep ignore you as you pass, unbothered, their wool sagging slightly from the drizzle. A caribou stands at the edge of a field, chewing without expression, like it knows things you don't. You pass a wooden sign with no text, just a fish carved deeply into the plank. It points east. Jan told you about it. "That's where the sky breaks first," he'd said. "If you see blue beyond that post, change your plans and chase it." It's gray today, but you nod at the sign anyway, out of respect. Farther on, you spot the hill where the weather fishers used to plant flags yellow for wind, red for danger, green for good sailing. There's no flag flying now, just a crooked pole. Still, your eyes search for one out of habit. You reach the next village in under an hour. It's more modern, if you can call it that. There's a shop with fluorescent lights, and the coffee tastes like something from an airport. But even here, someone has propped up a glass jar full of dried seaweed and written "Rain Tomorrow" on the label. A man walks in wearing a plastic poncho and rubber boots. He notices you staring at the jar. "Don't knock it," he says. "That weed's more reliable than the forecast." You believe him. Of course you do. As the road widens, you switch on the radio. It crackles through a dozen channels of static, finally landing on one where an old woman is reading poetry about fjords and longing. Her voice is slow, patient, almost hypnotic. You don't understand all the words, but the rhythm is soothing, like being rocked. Somewhere between the coastline and the airport, the sky breaks. Not dramatically, no thunderclap, no chorus of angels. Just a soft unfurling of blue behind the clouds, like someone slowly drawing back a curtain. The sun doesn't shine so much as glance at you. A shy, golden smirk. You pull over, step out, raise your face. It smells like salt and thawed earth, and maybe, just maybe, the ghost of cod jerky. You exhale deeply. You wonder, when John said to sniff the air and trust the weird signs, did he mean this? Later, at the airport, a young couple is arguing in the duty-free section about whether the volcanic ash soap is artisanal or just dirty. You smile. You're already too far gone to care. You're still thinking about Sigga's journal, the fish scale storm chart, and that one elder who insisted his knee could smell fog. He might have been right. You board the plane. The window seat feels both too small and too far from the sea. You buckle in, then immediately unbuckle, adjusting the belt like it's a relic from another culture. As the engines hum to life, you watch the tarmac shimmer under mist. The runway is lined with rocks. No reason, just aesthetics maybe, or superstition. The captain's voice comes through, cheerful and efficient. He mentions tailwinds, time zones, and turbulence. You close your eyes. You already know what the air smells like above the clouds, and then lift off. There's a small jolt, the way every story ends. Not with fanfare, but with gravity letting go. The world tilts. Iceland vanishes below you in a blanket of fog and scattered green. But in your pocket is a note that smells faintly of smoke and fish oil. And in your mind, the weather still speaks in tongues only you now understand. You aren't leaving something behind. You're taking something with you, always. Now, as your eyes begin to grow heavy, let your thoughts drift like sea foam on an outgoing tide. The sounds of Iceland's soft wind against sod roofs, distant gulls crying over misty cliffs, boots crunching over volcanic pebbles, fade gently behind you. Your breath slows, deepens. The rhythm of the waves that once rocked ancient fishing boats now rocks your imagination. You're safe now. No storms are coming, no fish to gut, no weather to read, only the hush of night wrapping around you like Jon's old sweater. The scent of salt lingers. You can almost feel the soft drizzle cooling your cheeks, the mossy earth springy underfoot. Perhaps the sky will stay clear, or maybe not, but it no longer matters. You've learned to listen not with your ears, but with your sense of presence. Let each memory sink, like stones into still water-forming gentle ripples, then stillness. The village is still there, you know, waiting in the mist, the cod drying quietly. The elders bickering over the barometer, the wind snaking around cliffs and through door cracks. A world that asked for nothing but your attention and gave you quiet wisdom in return. Let that stillness carry you now. You don't need to hold on to every detail, just the feeling. The deep, settled calm that comes after a long journey when there's nothing left to solve, no signs to read, no winds to fear. Only the hush, the breath, the softness of sleep. Let go now. You're home.